My name is Stephanie Allen, and I was born into what many would call the quintessential American dream. From the outside, my family appeared perfect. A house with lavender bushes lining the front yard, a pristine white picket fence, and warm lighting spilling through the windows during cozy family dinners. But beneath that polished exterior lay a suffocating reality, a life dominated by unrelenting expectations, constant comparisons, and an unbearable weight of perfectionism. As the firstborn of Mark and Linda Allen, I entered this world under a microscope. My father, a software engineer with a passion for mathematics, envisioned raising a prodigy who could solve equations before kindergarten. My mother, on the other hand, had devoured over 40 books on child psychology before I was even born. Together they treated me not as their daughter but as a project, an experiment to mold into greatness. By the time I turned 3, it became painfully clear that I wasn't meeting their lofty standards. One evening, after yet another failed attempt to teach me how to count to 20 or write my own name, my mother sighed deeply, her voice laced with frustration. "Mark," she said, glancing at my father across the room, "I don't think she's capable of learning as fast as we hoped. We need to intervene early so we don't miss the golden stage." Dad didn't respond immediately. Instead he looked at me, not with disappointment exactly but with something worse, indifference. It was as if I were a math problem yielding the wrong answer, one too flawed to bother solving further. That look haunted me for years. Then came Clare. When I was 4, my younger sister arrived, and overnight, everything changed. The house transformed into a fortress of educational tools, brain-boosting toys imported from Europe, emotion flashcards designed by child psychologists, and advanced learning programs tailored specifically for her development. Meanwhile, I was handed pre-printed workbooks and told to try harder. One afternoon stands out vividly in my memory. I was sitting quietly in the corner of the living room, building structures with Lego blocks when my mother walked past. She paused briefly, glanced down at me, and said dismissively, "Claire is only 7 months old and already responding to 3-step sequences. You keep playing." Her words stung more than any slap ever could. They weren't just criticism, they were a declaration, a loud and unmistakable signal that I no longer mattered. The breaking point came when I was 12. For as long as I could remember, I had my own room upstairs, a sanctuary where morning sunlight filtered softly through the blinds, casting golden beams onto the walls. It was the one place where I felt truly myself. But one day, without warning, Claire barged in. "Mom says I'm moving up here," she announced casually. "This room's bigger and I need space for my new study corner." I stared at her, certain she was joking. "No," I replied firmly. "This is my room." Claire shrugged indifferently and walked away. Less than 24 hours later, I returned home from school to find my belongings packed haphazardly into boxes. My cherished room now bore Claire's name, filled with brand new furniture and expensive learning equipment. I was relocated to a cramped, dingy space next to the laundry room, a tiny cell barely large enough for a bed and desk. Standing there, fists clenched and tears streaming down my face, I called out, "Mom, why would you do this?" That was my room. I've had it since I was little. She didn't even turn around. "You're older now, Stephanie. You should learn to give way. Claire needs it more. Don't make a scene." In that moment, something inside me shattered. I realized then what I had suspected for years. I was invisible in my own home. A shadow lurking behind Claire's brilliance, present but never truly seen. After the day I was forced out of my room, life in the Allen household became a relentless series of reminders that I didn't belong. Every morning, I woke up in that cramped, suffocating space next to the laundry room, where the hum of the washing machine often drowned out any thoughts of hope or ambition. My new room wasn't just small, it was symbolic. It represented everything I had come to understand about my place in the family, invisible, expendable, and perpetually overshadowed by Claire's brilliance. At school things weren't much better. By then, I had learned to stop expecting praise, not from teachers, not from friends, and certainly not from my parents. But even so, there were moments when I thought maybe, just maybe, I could prove myself worthy of recognition. Like the time I won second place in the school-wide art competition. When I brought home the painting, a vibrant depiction of the forest behind our house, inspired by the view from my old bedroom window, I felt a flicker of pride for the first time in years. "Mom," I said, holding it up as she stood at the kitchen counter chopping vegetables, "look what I did." She glanced at it briefly, her lips tightening into an almost imperceptible frown. "That's nice, Stephanie," she said flatly before turning back to her cutting board. Then, without missing a beat, she added, "Claire read an entire short story in English today. Her tutor says she's ahead of schedule." I stared at her, clutching the painting tighter. For a moment I wanted to scream, to demand why nothing I ever did mattered, but I knew it wouldn't change anything. Instead, I walked upstairs to my tiny room, shut the door quietly and leaned the painting against the wall. The colors seemed duller somehow, less alive than they had been earlier. As the years went on, the comparisons only grew sharper. Claire became the star of every conversation, every milestone celebrated with fanfare. She attended private tutoring sessions twice a week, played the violin perfectly according to Mom, and joined exclusive summer programs designed to groom future Ivy League candidates. Meanwhile, I trudged through public school, carrying my own books, managing my own deadlines, and navigating the labyrinth of adolescence alone. But perhaps the most painful blow came during my senior year of high school. College applications were looming, and while Claire was already being prepped for Stanford, I was left to figure things out on my own. One evening, during one of Grandma Helen and Grandpa Arthur's rare visits, the topic finally surfaced over dinner. "That's wonderful, Claire," Grandma said warmly after hearing about Claire's plans for a prestigious prep program. Then turning to me she asked, "And you, Stephanie? Have you thought about college yet?" For the first time all night I felt a spark of hope. Maybe this was my chance to share something of my own, to be seen if only for a moment. "I applied to the University of Oregon and UC Davis," I replied, trying to sound confident. "I got accepted into Oregon's business program with a partial scholarship. If I can get more financial aid." I didn't even finish before Mom set down her fork and knife with a sharp clink that echoed through the room. "Stephanie," she interrupted, her voice tight, "your father and I have talked. We can't provide more help with your tuition this year." I blinked, stunned. "What?" Dad jumped in as though he'd rehearsed his lines. "We need to prioritize Claire. She's been invited to an Ivy League prep program. It's a rare opportunity." My heart sank. So that was it. All the college savings they'd promised me were now going to Claire. "Mom," I tried again, desperation creeping into my voice, "but what am I supposed to do?" She sighed as if stating the obvious. "Community college isn't a bad option, Stephanie. We're taking some time to work. You'll figure it out." A bad option. The words stung like salt on an open wound. They weren't just dismissing my dreams, they were erasing them entirely. The room fell silent. No one spoke except for the faint clink of Grandma Helen's spoon against her plate. "Linda," she said, her voice low but firm, "both girls are my granddaughters. I can't sit here and watch one be cast aside." Mom pursed her lips. "Mom, this isn't—" "Yes, it is," Grandpa Arthur interjected, his tone leaving no room for argument. "It absolutely is our business." That night, as I cleared dishes in the kitchen, Grandma Helen approached me. She placed a gentle hand on my shoulder and looked me straight in the eye. "You don't have to carry this burden anymore," she said softly. "We'll pay for your college tuition, all of it. No loans needed." I turned to her, tears streaming down my face. "But that's too much money." "It's not too much when it's an investment in someone who tries," she replied, smiling gently. "You don't need favoritism to shine, Stephanie. You've already done it on your own." Her words stayed with me long after I left the kitchen. For the first time in years I felt a glimmer of hope, not because of the money but because someone finally believed in me. When fall arrived, I moved into the dorms at the University of Oregon. The day I left, Mom gave me a half-hearted hug at the door and said, "Be frugal and don't expect anything from us." Claire didn't even look up from her phone. I stepped out of that house, dragging my suitcase across the front yard path, feeling like I had opened a new door, one without condescending stares or bitter comparison. The University of Oregon wasn't just a new chapter. It was an entirely different world. For the first time, I wasn't just another kid in the background. Here I was, Stephanie Allen, a business student with sharp analytical skills and an unrelenting work ethic. The professors didn't care about my past or whether I had been overshadowed by anyone. They only saw potential, and I was determined to prove them right. Every late night spent in the library, every early morning walk to class through the misty campus paths, felt like steps toward reclaiming myself. My grandparents, Helen and Arthur, became my anchors, not just financially but emotionally. Every weekend, I called them to share even the smallest victories, acing a midterm, finishing a group project ahead of schedule, or landing a spot on the dean's list for 3 consecutive semesters. "You're doing more than surviving, Stephanie," Grandma Helen told me once during one of our calls. "You're thriving. That's what matters." Her words stayed with me, fueling my determination. By my senior year, I had built a reputation among my peers as someone who could dissect complex data sets and turn them into actionable insights. Professors praised my strategic thinking, classmates sought my help with assignments, and recruiters began reaching out before graduation. But it wasn't until Dr. Elgin, one of my finance professors, referred me to a summer internship at Bradley and Lane Capital that everything truly changed. Bradley and Lane wasn't just any investment firm. It was a powerhouse known for shaping future leaders in finance. On my first day standing outside their sleek downtown office building, I couldn't help but feel both excitement and terror. This was my chance to prove that I belonged, not because of favoritism or privilege, but because of sheer grit and ability. The internship started smoothly enough, analyzing market trends, drafting risk reports, and attending meetings where senior analysts discussed billion-dollar portfolios. But halfway through the program, something caught my attention. A cluster of tech stocks showing unusually strong internal indicators compared to broader market performance. Most analysts dismissed it as breakout potential, but something about the numbers didn't sit right with me. For 2 sleepless nights, I pored over every detail. Revenue reports, balance sheets, and appendix filings buried deep within quarterly disclosures. What I uncovered chilled me to the bone. These companies weren't growing organically, they were inflating revenue through internal transactions, essentially buying their own products to fabricate sales. If we didn't pull out in time, Bradley and Lane stood to lose $32 million in client funds. I knew I couldn't stay silent, but speaking up meant stepping into uncharted territory. As an intern, I had no authority, no credibility beyond my own analysis. Still, I compiled a 42-page report detailing the findings and created a risk simulation model to demonstrate the potential fallout. Then came the hardest part, presenting it to the executive boardroom. On that Monday morning, I walked into the glass-walled conference room, clutching my folder tightly. 3 senior managers sat across from me, each holding a copy of my resume. Zaylan, the lead portfolio manager, broke the silence. "So, Miss Allen, what makes you think these stocks are problematic?" I took a deep breath and began explaining, not just the data but the psychology behind it, how inflated figures often mask deeper structural flaws. For 20 minutes, I spoke without interruption, laying out charts, graphs, and projections. When I finished, the room fell silent. Finally, the CFO leaned back in his chair, eyes wide with realization. "She just saved the company," he said quietly, turning to the CEO. Within 3 days, the entire portfolio was restructured based on my recommendations. 6 months later, not only had we avoided a catastrophic loss, but the firm reported an 11.4% growth, the highest in 7 years. After the internship ended, I returned to campus with a renewed sense of purpose. Graduating with honors and having a research paper published in a financial journal opened doors I never imagined possible. When Bradley and Lane offered me a full-time role as a junior investment analyst, I accepted without hesitation. But the real turning point came 3 years later. After countless hours refining risk models and studying behavioral patterns in volatile markets, I developed PRISM, a proprietary system integrating consumer psychology, social media trends, and global political shifts to predict market behavior. At first, it was just a personal project, but after accurately forecasting price swings in 3 major stock groups ahead of key events, upper management took notice. One afternoon, I was summoned to the senior boardroom. Richard Langley, the CEO, smiled as everyone settled into their seats. "Stephanie," he began, "we're creating a new position, Chief Strategic Investment Officer. And no one is more deserving than you." I could hardly breathe. Just 4 years earlier, I'd been told I might want to work for a while and figure things out later. Now here I was, being handed the reins to lead strategy for a multi-million-dollar firm. That evening, instead of celebrating with champagne or parties, I drove straight to my grandparents' house. Their red brick home still radiated warmth, with Grandma Helen baking cookies and Grandpa Arthur making tea. I placed the appointment letter on the kitchen table. They looked at each other and smiled. "Little Stephanie," Grandpa Arthur said, his voice filled with pride, "now leading the way." I looked at them, tears welling up in my eyes. They were the first people who ever believed I didn't have to be exceptional to be worthy. For the first time, I didn't need anyone's approval. I had already proven it to myself. It was supposed to be a quiet celebration, a small gathering to mark my appointment as Chief Strategic Investment Officer at Bradley and Lane. I had sent $3,500 to my mother with simple instructions. Organize something intimate, nothing extravagant. I thought perhaps this could be an olive branch, a chance to reconnect after years of estrangement. But as I stepped into the old house in Salem that evening, the air thick with the scent of gourmet dishes and expensive floral arrangements, I realized I had been naive. The house looked unrecognizable, white orchids covered every surface, golden ribbons wound up the staircase like garlands of mockery, and waiters moved silently through the crowd with trays of champagne. My grandparents stood by the bar, chatting quietly, their expressions unreadable. Claire descended the stairs in a striking red satin dress, her face perfectly made up, exuding confidence. Beside her stood a tall, polished man I didn't recognize. I froze for a moment, my heart sinking as the pieces clicked into place. This wasn't a celebration of my achievement, it was Claire's stage once again, just like it always had been. When I raised my glass to speak, my mother abruptly stood, beaming as though she were unveiling a masterpiece. "Dear family," she announced, her voice carrying across the room, "we're here today not just to reconnect but to celebrate something truly special. Claire and her boyfriend Andrew are officially engaged." Cheers erupted around me, applause filling the air. I felt the weight of their betrayal settle over me like a suffocating blanket. Every eye turned toward Claire, who basked in the attention while I stood there, invisible yet again. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. My father gripped my wrist tightly, his voice low and venomous. "Don't ruin this," he hissed. "If you make a scene now, don't expect anything else from this family. No contact, no inheritance, nothing." For a moment, anger surged within me, hot and blinding. But then another feeling took hold, a fierce determination. I pulled my hand free and stepped forward, raising my glass high enough to catch the light. "Excuse me, everyone," I said, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. "May I have just a moment?" All eyes turned to me now, curious or confused. Claire paused mid-step, her smile faltering slightly. "This gathering today," I began, calm but clear, "was planned to celebrate a major milestone in my life. I was recently named Chief Strategic Investment Officer at Bradley & Lane, a major financial firm in Seattle. I am the one who sent the money for this event. My mother agreed to organize it, and never once mentioned it would be turned into an engagement party." Murmurs rippled through the room. My grandparents stood still, stunned. "I'm not against Claire's engagement," I continued, meeting my mother's gaze head-on. "What I can't stay silent about is the fact that my own family tried to erase me from my own moment, just like they did all throughout my childhood." Andrew turned to Claire, confusion etched on his face. "You told me this was just a family gathering." Claire flushed, stammering, I just wanted to wait for the right time, using your sister's money to stage your big reveal." He cut in, his voice lowering. "I came here expecting to feel welcomed, not to watch someone be pushed out of their own moment." Without another word, he set his glass down and walked away. Claire chased after him, pleading, but the car door slammed shut before she could reach him. The Mercedes disappeared into the night, leaving behind only silence. My father stood, his face red with fury. "You should know your place, Stephanie. This is still—" "No," I interrupted, my voice cutting through his like steel. "This is a place built on favoritism. It's not a home anymore." I turned to my grandparents who hadn't moved. Grandma Helen's eyes shimmered with tears, and Grandpa Arthur gripped my hand firmly as I stepped toward them. "I don't need the rest of this family to know who I am," I said, my voice trembling but resolute. As I walked out the door, the same one I had left in silence years ago, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Relief, sadness, and a profound sense of closure. 3 years had passed since the night I walked out of my parents' house, carrying the truth, the pain, and the strength I never knew I possessed. Those 3 years were a journey of transformation, not just in my career but in my soul. By the time I turned 30, I had accomplished something that once felt impossible. I became the youngest female CEO in Bradley & Lane Capital's 60-plus-year history. The day Richard Langley announced his retirement, no one expected him to name me as his successor. But it wasn't luck, it was the culmination of every late-night strategy session, every risk taken, and every moment I chose integrity over convenience. Standing on the stage during the official announcement, I didn't speak to impress. I spoke to represent a new generation. One that doesn't need to be born into privilege or favoritism to create its own path. After the speech, I stepped outside onto the balcony overlooking the city skyline. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was Grandma Helen calling. "I did it," I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. Grandpa Arthur laughed on the other end. "You've always been worthy, Stephanie. From day one." Their words stayed with me long after we hung up. They weren't just congratulating me, they were reminding me how far I'd come. Every Sunday afternoon, I visited them at their red brick home. We toasted bread, flipped through old photo albums, and shared stories. Sometimes, Grandma would recount moments from my childhood, while Grandpa pretended not to remember, just so I could retell every detail. These gatherings weren't just about nostalgia, they were about healing. But life hadn't been kind to Claire. At 27, she still lived with my parents, her engagement ring long gone. She drifted from one failed attempt to another, dropping out of courses, abandoning projects, and blaming everyone else for her struggles. Occasionally, Grandma Helen mentioned hearing updates about her through mutual friends, but I didn't ask further. I had learned that some relationships aren't meant to last, especially when they're built on denial and resentment. One spring afternoon, as I was leaving the office after a global strategy meeting, I spotted someone waiting in the lobby. At first glance, I thought it might be a client, but then I recognized her. Clare. She looked thinner, her gaze uncertain, though she still wore her signature polished look, a designer coat and expensive heels. "I'm not here to apologize," she said immediately, her voice defensive like a shield. I want to know how you're doing so well without anyone lifting you up." I studied her face, the same features that had once overshadowed mine, but this time I felt no anger, no pity. Just clarity. "Because I once had nothing, Claire," I replied softly. "And that's when I learned to stand on my own 2 feet. Something you've never had to do." She stared at me for a long moment, searching for something in my expression. Then, without another word, she turned and walked away. Watching her leave, I realized I wasn't angry anymore. This was closure, not just for her but for me. Back in my office, my team was already preparing for our next project. As I joined them, I felt a profound sense of peace. No matter where the path starts, as long as you don't abandon yourself, the destination will always be worth it. That evening, I drove back to my grandparents' house. The apple blossoms in their backyard swayed gently in the breeze, filling the air with their familiar scent. Sitting on the porch swing, I reflected on everything I'd overcome, from being the forgotten child in my own family to becoming a leader who inspires others. I didn't need validation from those who once denied me because I had found my place among those who truly believed in me. More importantly, I had learned to believe in myself. My story isn't just about overcoming favoritism in a family, it's a testament to the power of perseverance and inner worth. I was once overlooked, pushed aside even in my own celebration. But I chose to rise, not out of spite but out of truth and dignity. Today I know that self-worth isn't given, it's earned. And the greatest inheritance my grandparents gave me wasn't material wealth, it was faith. Faith that I could rebuild my life, redefine success, and find joy in authenticity. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, I smiled. For the first time in my life I felt completely free. Free from the weight of expectations, free from the need for approval, and free to define my own legacy.